Florida Crossroads is produced with support from the Florida Department of Education.
Hello and welcome to Florida Crossroads. I'm Beth Switzer. Miami is known for sun, sand, and beautiful beaches, but there's much more to discover. A rich history going back thousands of years and a vibrant culture make Miami one of the world's most popular destinations. As part of the Florida Crossroads series, Florida Remembers, producer Kirsty Satterstrom highlights some of the people, places, and events that have made a mark in Miami's history.
No other city in the United States is like Miami. Not only is it a vacation destination, Miami is an international metropolis with a diverse population, and it's widely recognized as the only major U.S. city to be founded by a woman. Julia Tuttle is known as the Mother of Miami, and a woman who was ahead of her time. The widow of a wealthy iron foundry owner from Cleveland, Ohio, Tuttle moved to Florida in 1891 and purchased 640 acres of land on the north bank of the Miami River. She arrived by barge with her 2 adult children, some farm animals, and a vision.
She was a 21st century woman in the 19th century. Before she left Cleveland, she said basically, you may think this is a very strange idea, but I'm going to build a city in the wilderness.
Tuttle had visited Miami several times beforehand, starting in 1874. Her father had bought land in Miami shores where he grew citrus and other products.
When Julia came down, she just loved it. And she came down 2 or 3 times before and really wanted to stay, but her family and her husband's business was in Cleveland, so she went back. Then when her father passed away and left his property to her, she bought land here and bought the nicest spot in Miami, just north of the river.
Tuttle's property included Fort Dallas, which had been used as a military base in 1836 to 1857 during the Seminole Wars. She converted the fort into a home for entertaining guests, with sweeping views of the Miami River and Biscayne Bay. The area was sparsely populated. Her closest neighbors were William and Mary Brickell, who owned a large tract of land and ran a trading post on the other side of the river. While many people viewed the area as a mosquito-infested jungle, Tuttle saw the potential for it to become a big city and international trading hub, but it couldn't happen overnight. At the time, Miami was isolated, only accessible by steamship.
So we were really the last unconnected frontier in the continental United States. You could only get to Miami by boat.
Tuttle knew the only way the area would prosper was if it was accessible by rail. Her first attempt to get trains down to Miami was unsuccessful. She contacted a personal friend from Cleveland, James Ingram, who at the time worked for Henry Plant, a developer of railroads along Florida's west coast.
And she said to him, let's see about bringing this railroad from Tampa to Miami, which seemed logical. Except there was only one problem. You had to cross the Everglades to get here. So James Ingram and his group started out from Tampa, got lost in the Everglades, had a horrible time, finally made it to Miami and said basically forget it. So that was her first strike. That was in 1892.
But she didn't give up. Next, she contacted the Florida East Coast Railroad of Henry Flagler in 1893, sending letters to him for 2 years. He wasn't interested until the Great Freeze of February 1895, which wiped out citrus crops across the state and sent vacationers packing. Tuttle alerted him that the freeze had spared the Miami River. Story has it she sent a bouquet of orange blossoms to Flagler to convince him that the area was frost-proof.
What the orange blossoms did was made him realize that this was beneath the frost line, so he could bring tourists down like he'd been doing all down the East Coast. He was already to Palm Beach, and he probably would have gotten here eventually, but this was the impetus that made it happen when it happened.
Tuttle and Flagler made a deal. She would split her property with him if he would extend his railroad from West Palm Beach to Miami, build a luxury hotel, and lay out a new town. Her neighbors, the Brickells, would also contribute land. The result was the birth of a new city. By 1896, the heart of the community was a retail district along Avenue D, today's Miami Avenue. Passenger train service to Miami began on April 22, 1896, and by July 28th of the same year, the city of Miami was incorporated.
The area on the river, according to the Florida State Census of '95, had 9 people. And suddenly the railroad enters Miami, and you've got an incorporated city by July of 1896 of about 700 to 800 people. So she was instrumental in the creation of Miami, this wilderness. And she just believed that it had such potential, its location as a great maybe trading nexus. She talked about its clouds, its weather, its waters. All it needed was a connection. The only connection it had at that point was the sea. And now you had a railroad connection, and that just brought a lot of people down here.
By 1897, the luxury hotel Flagler agreed to build opened its doors. Called the Royal Palm Hotel, it was 5 stories tall and featured the city's first electric lights, elevators, and swimming pool. Although Tuttle would live to see her vision become a reality, she died in 1898 at the age of 50, after living in Florida for only 7 years.
It was not determined what she died of, but they think that it was a brain aneurysm. Some reports say that she woke up one morning feeling bad and then died that day. Other reports say she'd been sick for 2 or 3 days.
The love for her became universal the moment she died. The city was shocked. They closed for the first time ever the downtown business district, which was small, only about 1,200 people then. They closed it during the time of her funeral procession and burial out of respect for her. And I think that's really where they showed their tremendous love for her.
Julia Tuttle was the 12th person to be buried in the Miami City Cemetery. A large headstone stands in the middle of the cemetery, bringing attention to her importance as the mother of Miami. A 10-foot bronze statue of Tuttle was erected in Bayfront Park on Miami's 114th birthday. She now stands surrounded by high-rise buildings, looking out to the port of Miami and holding the famous orange blossoms in her hand. The statue's skirt depicts various scenes from 1891 to 1898, the 7 years Tuttle spent in Miami.
If you walk around her skirt, you can see Julia Tuttle's Miami. That's what we're talking about here.
Images include a picture of Henry Flagler and Julia Tuttle shaking hands, Flagler's East Coast Railway in Miami, the Royal Palm Hotel, as well as Fort Dallas and Avenue D.
Well, we hope that people will touch it. It's kind of like getting the sense of Miami history, to feel it literally and in your heart about this woman's singular role in founding the city of Miami.
Although Miami became a city in 1896, that was not the first time the banks of the Miami River were inhabited by a thriving community. Miami's oldest settlers, the Tequesta tribe, lived along the river thousands of years ago. In fact, the city's name comes from the Native American word Miami, meaning big water. The first record of European contact with the Tequesta was in 1513 by the Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon when he discovered the Florida coast. But it wasn't until the summer of 1998 that the sophistication of the Tequestas was revealed, with one of the most important discoveries in the history of Florida archaeology, the Miami Circle.
But little by little, we noticed this is going to be a big site. This is going to be a big significant site, not only in archaeology, but in the city of Miami and the community. It was going to be important.
The circle was first discovered when a 1950s-era apartment building on the mouth of the Miami River was being demolished to make room for another high-rise condo. As required by law, the county archaeologist conducted a survey of the site before new construction could begin. Little by little, archaeologist Bob Carr and several others began uncovering hundreds of mysterious holes and a layer of limestone bedrock just 3 feet below the surface. Some were larger basins, several feet long. Archaeological deposits called midden, like shells, broken tools, and discarded food remains, were found on top and in the basins. Surveyor Ted Riggs studied the basins and concluded that they were part of a circle of similar holes.
And based on his calculations, we took a backhoe and we stripped the soils, that is the fill, because there was a lot of fill under the Brickell apartment, down to the top of the original midden. And when we continued digging by hand, we found that Ted was right, that this was a circle.
24 of the largest holes or basins comprised a perfect circle, 38 feet in diameter. That's when archaeologists knew they had found something remarkable, possibly the imprint of an ancient monument or structure built by a long-lost people. As the media picked up on the discovery and news of the circle began to spread worldwide, countless theories of what the circle could be were proposed.
Many, many ideas of what it was. We heard from one extreme that it was a UFO landing pad, that it was a form of an American Stonehenge, that it was a calendar. More mundane interpretations were that it was a sewage pipe or sewage outfall area, that the holes in the rock were for the sewage to go into, that it was an area also used for planting coconut trees. So I had to hear all of these theories, and we had to go through the meticulous science of disproving the more articulate or more possible or plausible ones.
The science would take some time, though. By February 1999, months after the initial discovery, mysteries surrounding the Miami Circle remained. Archaeologists were still piecing together artifacts to figure out the origin of the circle, but time was running out. The site was on prime Miami real estate. Construction of the apartments had been delayed, and the developer was losing money. Protesters and community activists rallied around the site, urging the city to save a piece of Miami's history. The fight was personal for Catherine Hummingbird Ramirez, a self-described Carib tribal Indian queen who wanted to preserve the sacred site as a legacy of her ancestors.
I see the ancestors here whenever I come here. This sacred site had to be saved because I believe that the Great Spirit wanted it to be saved.
State and local officials were under intense pressure to take action. Miami-Dade County Mayor Alex Pinellas began legal proceedings.
This was headed and did end up in the courts, and it was determined that there was a public good that would be satisfied by acquiring this property, and then it was just a matter of arriving at a price.
The developer, who initially bought the land for $8 million, agreed to sell it to the state of Florida and Miami-Dade County for $27 million. Archaeologists continued to work to answer questions like who built the circle, for what purpose, and when. Archaeologists knew one of the first people to have lived at the mouth of the Miami River were the Tequesta Indians, a small group of hunter-gatherers who traveled around the Everglades and the subtropical coast. Artifacts found at the circle were compared to those from other excavation sites in the Miami area known to be Tequestan. The artifacts matched, verifying the Tequestas built the circle and had active trading patterns.
The site was very rich in artifacts. Thousands and thousands of artifacts were uncovered, including pottery sherds. We actually found axes made out of basalt. And we also found galena, which is lead that came from Missouri. We found pieces of copper that had come from Michigan. So we began to realize that this was a very special site in terms of attracting a lot of materials through trade, probably because there were high-status individuals using this location.
Further analysis of the circle revealed the basins were cut into the rock to hold wooden posts that supported the walls of a building.
It was the first time that what appeared to be a permanent, long-lasting structure had been built by the Tequesta, because up until that time, the myth that had been created about the Tequesta and other South Florida Indians is they were basically very primitive. They were just nomadic and wandering around the wilds of South Florida, not really doing anything of any permanence. This discovery of a very well executed structure that was 30-something feet in diameter indicated that that was not the case, that these people were actually building things long-lasting and with some level of sophistication.
Considering its location on the mouth of the Miami River and the artifacts found, archaeologists determined the structure was probably used as a chief's house or for ceremonial purposes. The age of the site was also no longer a mystery.
But what we did is we dated materials that were within the basins that formed the circle, and where it could be argued, well, that stuff could have fallen in at any time. We found a pattern within these basins of a range of dates that were between AD 200 and AD 400, suggesting to us that that probably is very close to when this feature was actually constructed.
While the circle was saved from development, it laid inactive for 10 years, surrounded by a fence at the foot of the Brickell Bridge. In 2009, the state partnered with the Historical Museum of Southern Florida, now known as History Miami, to create a park around the circle and offer a rare open green space for visitors. The museum began managing the site, and on February 23, 2011, the Miami Circle Park was dedicated and open to the public.
If you visit the Miami Circle today, you'll see plants that outline the circle, but you won't see the actual archaeological site. That's because it's been covered with materials like peat rock and sand for protection.
But everybody wanted to see the site. They actually wanted to see the circle, but we knew from studies over the years that the minute we exposed the brittle limestone foundation, that bedrock, it just wouldn't hold up to the elements.
While the circle remains buried as a way to protect it from the elements, it's also guaranteed to be protected from future development. The Miami Circle has been designated as a National Historic Landmark by the federal government.
It puts it at a more higher status, not only for protection, for funding, for grants, but it's saying this is one of the most important sites in the United States.
From the ancient Tequesta Indians to the growth and development that has defined the 21st century, Miami continues to evolve, welcoming people from all over the world to visit and to live. While Cubans have come to the U.S. in search of a better life throughout history, waves of Cubans began arriving in Miami after 1959 to flee Fidel Castro's communist regime. One such wave between 1960 and 1962 has become known as Operation Pedro Pan. The secret 2-year-long effort resulted in more than 14,000 unaccompanied children escaping Cuba.
You can ask any Cuban kid, especially Pedro Pan, what date did you leave Cuba? And everybody knows. Just one of those things that they just remember.
On Tuesday, June 13th, 1961, I got on a Pan American flight to Miami.
I arrived in Miami October 19th, 1961.
Came over October the 10th, 1961, which is actually the day of the independence of Cuba. So for me, it was not only Cuba's independence, it was also my independence.
Guillermo Paz was 11 years old when he arrived in Miami. He tells of a happy childhood in Cuba, living in a nice home with his parents and older sister, and playing hide and seek in the streets with neighborhood children. But that all started changing in 1959 when Fidel Castro took power.
They went ahead and they started closing the schools. You start seeing people being executed in TV and live TV, which I actually saw, you know, which is pretty impressive for an 11-year-old.
More subtle things started to happen. Religion was started to be looked down upon because, you know, as the communists say, it was the opium of the people. Newspapers were taken over, the TV were taken over, all the mass communication was taken over by the government. And so you had to be careful what you said to your neighbor, because if you said something that might be interpreted that was, quote, counter-revolutionary, end quote, you might get into trouble.
Many parents feared indoctrination and that the Cuban government would take away their parental authority. In November 1960, a boy named Pedro was sent to the U.S. alone. When relatives could not take care of him, he was taken to the Catholic Welfare Bureau in Miami, and the director, Father Brian Walsh, made arrangements for him. Father Walsh realized the deteriorating situation in Cuba would result in many more Pedros, and he began to lay the groundwork to address the issue. Back in Cuba, parents were working in secrecy with James Baker, the headmaster of an academy in Havana, on plans to get their children out. Baker traveled to Miami and asked Father Walsh for assistance, and Operation Pedro Pan was born. Baker would arrange for the children to get out of Cuba, and Walsh would provide for their care in Miami. The U.S. government gave Father Walsh unprecedented permission to sign visa waivers for the children.
It allowed these kids to legitimately, not to flee in a boat, to legitimately get on a plane and come to the United States because of the papers they had.
What started as hundreds turned into thousands as parents from all regions of Cuba made the tough decision to send children between the ages of 5 and 18 to the U.S., ahead of the rest of the family. During the first 5 months of Operation Pedro Pan, less than 1,000 children came under the program. But after the Bay of Pigs invasion failed to overthrow Fidel Castro in April 1961, and all private schools were nationalized, more than 13,000 children came in an 18-month period. Saying goodbye to his parents at the airport, Angones remembers his dad's parting words.
Behave, be proud, we love you, no drugs, be careful if anybody wants to give you any kind of injection, make sure that you know who it is, and we will see each other very soon.
Many children felt a mix of emotions, sadness and fear, but also hope and excitement.
I knew, and I was very happy to get out of Cuba, because I did not want to be there with the oppression that was happening over there. But at the same time, you knew you were on your own, going to a country that you did not speak the language, and you were going towards an unknown.
The name Operation Pedro Pan, or Operation Peter Pan, was coined by a reporter for the Miami Herald, the children that flew. But unlike Peter Pan, these children continued to grow up even while separated from their families. The 1-hour plane ride marked a turning point in each child's life. Carmen Romanach was sent to Miami as a teenager with her 2 younger brothers. She immediately took on the role of an adult.
My mother said, okay, you are the mom now, you have to take care of them. I was 15.
We did a lot of growing up in a short period of time. We basically, in a matter of less than an hour, lost our youth.
Once the children landed at the Miami International Airport, 50% of the children were met by relatives or family friends. The other 50% came under the care of the Catholic Welfare Bureau.
When I left the plane, I had been told by my dad, because it must have been pretty well organized, to look for a person by the name of George. George turned out to be George Guarsh, who worked at the time for the Catholic Welfare Bureau.
He picked up, I think, most of the kids from Operation Pedro Pan. He was a very kind and gentle person, so he helped us through customs and through all the paperwork. Remember, we didn't know any English. I have never flown a plane before. You know, it was too many things going on at the same time. So he was very helpful.
To help keep track of the children, George Guarch kept an airport log, noting the name of each child, birth dates, type of entry visa, and where they went upon arrival. The first major challenge was finding accommodations to shelter so many children. The Catholic Welfare Bureau established youth camps in South Florida. They served as temporary homes until children were assigned to a family or were reunited with their own family. Romanach spent 9 days at Kendall Camp, where she was separated from her brothers.
And I remember my first night in Kendall, because, as I said, I was 15 going 16. There was a lot of younger girls there, and I could hear them crying.
While the separation from their families was tough on the children, it was just as tough on the parents. Carmen wrote her mother letters nearly every day.
I knew at the time, you know, when I was writing to her, telling about my brothers and me and how we were doing, she was waiting for those letters, her life. My mother said she used to go to our rooms and my room, sit in my room and pray a rosary, and then go to my brother's room and play 2 rosaries for each one of them. So she said she prayed 3 rosaries a day, and that was the only thing that kept her going.
As more and more children arrived in Miami, the camps became overcrowded. Catholic archdioceses from around the country stepped in to assist, and Cuban children were sent to licensed care providers in more than 100 cities and 40 states. Some Pedro Pan children were reunited with their parents in Miami after being separated for days or weeks. Others would wait much longer. In October of 1962, flights between the U.S. and Cuba stopped as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis, bringing an end to Operation Pedro Pan.
Any type of interaction between the United States and Cuba, even unofficial stuff, since we'd already broken diplomatic ties with Cuba, was over. So at that point, there's a much closer surveillance of everything that's coming out and in of Cuba. And that really kind of, I think, put the final nails in the program.
In 1965, the Freedom Flights began, allowing a series of flights between Cuba and the U.S. for those wishing to permanently leave the island. First priority was given to parents of unaccompanied Cuban children already in the U.S. By 1966, 90% of Pedro Pan children were reunited with their parents.
Most of the Pedro Pans, I say they were reunited with their parents. Now, we know some that were never reunited because of the parents died. We had some friends. I have a friend whose father was executed in a firing squad, so he never got to see his father again.
While the children arrived in the U.S. with only a few material items, they brought with them the tradition of family and a rigorous work ethic instilled by their parents. Many of these one-time refugee children learned English quickly, succeeded in school, and grew to have high positions in the church, the government, and business. Mel Martinez, who served as a U.S. Senator for Florida from 2005 to 2009, came to Miami as a teenager as part of Operation Pedro Pan. Frank Angones, who came to Miami at the age of 10, became the first Cuban-born president of the Florida Bar. Angones says his experience as a Pedro Pan gave him great motivation.
First, I wanted to do well by my parents for all that they had done for me. I was very lucky that my experience in this country was very positive. I'm a citizen by choice, but I feel that I owe the United States much more than someone that has been born here by happenstance because their parents.
Although it was a tough period in their lives, most Pedro Pans appreciate the ultimate sacrifice their parents made, enduring the pain of separation and sending them away from their homeland to freedom.
They made the right decision to send me. You know, I can't even imagine in my wildest, you always play what if this, what if that. And I've thought, I says, well, what if my parents hadn't sent me over? What would have happened? Well, the different scenarios that have come through my mind are just mind-blowing. I would say I probably wouldn't be alive today. So, but here I am, living in the good old USA.
In 1991, former Pedro Pan children created a nonprofit organization to give back to the community, document their history, and locate other Pedro Pans. The group has helped connect more than 2,000 members throughout the U.S. and the world. Operation Pedro Pan remains the largest exodus of unaccompanied children in the Western Hemisphere. Join us next time for Florida Crossroads for another edition of our series, Florida Remembers. Thanks for watching. For more information about Florida Crossroads and other episodes in the series, log on to our website, thefloridachannel.org.